It's been a good long while since I've made any comments about elements from within the glossary of the Threefold Lotus Sutra, and as I may do so with a few other of the entries at this time, I want to remind anybody listening to this video that I make no claim to be an expert in any sense whatsoever, other than the fact of being a devoted Buddhist who, back in the day, back in 1979, when I first got turned on to Mahayana Buddhism, I did deep study within the Lotus Sutra, and I love the Lotus Sutra. And for me, that Lotus Sutra led to the Pure Land Sutras, and ultimately to Shinjin, or faith in Amida Buddha. And it's in him that I rely upon for my fate when this life is over. But in any case, one of the key teachings within the Lotus Sutra, here we have the term in the glossary of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Kosei Publishing, of Buddha vehicle, also called the one vehicle, the vehicle leading to perfect enlightenment and Buddhahood, and transcending both Hinayana and Mahayana. It's my recollection that some people, in their more scholarly analysis of the Threefold Lotus Sutra, talk about the fact that it's not even clear really what does the Buddha mean when he refers to the one Buddha vehicle. And, I guess there can be various interpretations, but to my mind, what it means is that all the various paths, all the various ways that the Buddha has, utilizing skillful means to bring people along in terms of progress on their spiritual path, that's appropriate to their particular personality and circumstances and mentality, that these paths all ultimately converge into one path. It's almost like different streams coming into the ocean. And what is the nature of the ocean? Well, it is Buddhahood. In other words, Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism in particular, is what I think of as a system of universal salvation, meaning that everybody has the Buddha nature, and the goal is to become a Buddha, and everybody will eventually become a Buddha, no matter what their negative karma or personal and situational circumstances may be. So, this is what the Buddha is trying to steer us toward in the Lotus Sutra, in my opinion. Now, the next term in here that I will comment upon is a term called counterfeit law, and I'm going to read the definition within this glossary. The second of three stages through which the law passes in each Buddha period. And so what we're talking about here, when we talk about the law, we're talking about the Buddha Dharma, which was originally preached by Sakyamuni and back in about 500 BC, and then it goes on from there. So this explains the definition of this particular term, that in the first stage, that of the so-called righteous law, the law remains perfect. In the second stage, it is a mere copy without power, remaining in form alone. And in the third and final period, it is that of the decline of the law. The law vanishes, and a new Buddha appears in the world to preach the righteous law again. Within Buddhism, our understanding is that Maitreya is purported to be the Buddha in waiting, if you will, the Bodhisattva who will become a Buddha, and he would be the next Buddha in this Saha world here on this earth. But this notion of, these three stages, I think, was really latched onto in Japan, tying this now to the forms of Buddhism that are the new Buddhism of the Kamakura era in Japan, namely, Zen and Nichirenism and the Pure Land approach, and particularly in these latter two, that they had the notion of Mappo. And some of you out there may want to study this and make a comment below as to whether this has a tie-in, but it seems to me, just reading this, that it probably does, such that the belief at that time was that we were in the last phases, that humans were in the last phase of the teaching of the Buddha, and that nobody at that point really had the capability of attaining enlightenment through the more traditional practices. And that's why in the Pure Land approach, it was recommended simply to rely upon Amida Buddha, to rely on other power, and to say the name Namo Amida Butsu as a way of sort of transcending the negativity of our human circumstances through an easy path since nobody at that time was supposedly able to accomplish the difficult path of sages. Deer Park, a park in Benares, where the Buddha preached his first sermon to 5 fellow mendicants, Ajnata, Kaundinya, Asvajit, Vaspa, Mahanaman, and Badrika, shortly after his enlightenment. So we'll remember the story of the Buddha there, where when he became enlightened, he said, oh man, I don't think anybody's going to get this. And then, as a result, supposedly, of the influence of the gods or whatever, he ended up saying to himself, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And he went to his old friends, his old colleagues, so to speak, the people that he was practicing with, who initially kind of rejected him because they said, you've deviated from the path. You've gone ahead and you've eaten food. You've taken care of yourself in ways that suggest that you're no longer a legitimate seeker. But of course, ultimately, they did agree to listen, and Buddha, the Sakyamuni, the historical Buddha, gave his first sermon regarding the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to these 5 mendicants. And then let me just do one more here. The dharani, a dharani, it says in this glossary, literally means whole grasping. That's wholly grasping. That's WHOLLY. And then it gives 3 sub-definitions. 1, a magical spell or incantation. 2, special powers. And 3, the virtues that adhere to all good laws. Well, the way I've understood this is basically as a magical kind of incantation. And the Lotus Sutra actually, I think, has a whole chapter of dharani, and many of the Mahayana sutras do. I really can't make much of these, and if anybody has comments down below as to what your interpretation or understanding is of the dharani within Buddhism, I would be grateful. But my association with it is the idea that, if words and concepts are unable to express ultimate reality, well, does it matter if we use words and concepts that have meaning or ones that maybe don't have meaning? Well, that's a pretty far out speculative idea that I'm expressing, and I'm happy for anybody to tear that down. But humans have always wanted magical kinds of incantations, and these dharani were probably provided by early, particularly Mahayana Buddhists, to satisfy that desire and that need in the humans with whom they were sharing the Dharma. In any case, those are just a few thoughts on a few terms for what they're worth. And I hope they might have some meaning and some benefit to someone out there. Take care.